If you're old enough to remember or was impacted in any way about the Atlanta child murders, you'll understand the gravity of tonight's episode. Between 1979 and 1981, the disappearance and murder of at least 28 black children, teens, and young adults, mostly from low income neighborhoods, occurred at that time. Authorities ultimately convicted Wayne Williams of these heinous crimes. Now, the question has to be, and we can debate the evidence, racial bias, and whether all murders were actually linked, but it's still causing questions to this day. Yet, the overall arching significance the Atlanta child murders had was it changed how America investigated serial killings, missing children, and crimes involving marginalized communities. In theory, we still struggle with this practice across the United States. Tonight, we have family and friends of the victims to share their stories and their reservations about the case. I want you to take a look at this.
Child murders 1979 to 1981. Over the span of 2 years, at least 28 children, adolescents, and adults were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia. The majority of the victims were African American. Wayne Williams, a young African American man, was arrested and convicted for two of the murders, although he was never formally charged with the other crimes. The case prompted intense scrutiny of racial tensions, police investigations, and the criminal justice system.
Brother?
All right. Welcome, everybody. We got some special guests here tonight that I want to introduce. First, we got Nick Burston. Nick Burston was 10 years old when his 9-year-old cousin became one of these victims. He reached out to me, and what he told us, Jerome and I talked to him about, it was just fascinating and brought a lot of doubt and scrutiny to our minds as well. He introduced us to Jarvis Miller, who's here with us. And Jarvis Miller actually had two friends that are among those 28 victims. And then Nick also introduced us to author and historian Dwayne Hendricks, who they met because Hendricks has done a lot of work on the Atlanta child murders, looking into it. And I think it was after a press conference that they met. So he brings, let's say, investigative expertise to the situation, whereas Jarvis Miller, a friend of two of the victims, and Nick, a cousin of one of the victims, will bring us and give us an idea of they'll take us back in time and what this experience meant to them and everything like that. Before we hear from them, there's a video clip, Jerome, I want you to play, because in that video clip is Nick's cousin, not when it first starts, but as you get into the video, they're going to talk about a young man that was found on the side of a wall. And that's actually Nick's cousin. And that's going to be the bulk of what we discussed today, along with the two murdered friends that Jarvis Miller had. And then we're going to get Dwayne's expertise and what he knows about this as well. Can you play that before these gentlemen start talking, please?
Yeah.
9 years old, missing from his home for almost a month, then found strangled in an abandoned school. Jeffrey Lamar Mathis, 10 years old, missing since March 11th when he left home to run an errand. No one has seen him since. Latanya Wilson, 7 years old, kidnapped from the bedroom of her home on Verbena Street Southwest, missing since June 22nd.
And just 2 days ago, on Monday evening, another young boy was found dead in this grassy stretch behind a building on Wells Street Southwest. 9-year-old Anthony Bernard Carter had been missing from his West End home just a few blocks away since Sunday.
Altogether, 9 children between the ages of 7 and 14 have disappeared in the last year. 5 were later found dead. The other 4 are still missing. 7 of the children have disappeared since March. As late as yesterday, detectives in the Homicide Division at APD were saying there was no link between the cases. In fact, they wouldn't even acknowledge that there have been more kidnappings and murders involving children than in the past. But today, the head of the police department's missing persons section told a different story.
We're working on links to see if there's some kind of connection between these cases. That's something we have been working on since we got the first case of a child that was found murdered. I don't want to alarm the community if that's not the situation. Let us alarm the community when we have made links.
While police check out the similarities in all of these crimes, the mothers of 3 of the dead children are warning other parents to be careful. They have set up the Committee to Stop Children's Murders. The group is planning a seminar at the end of the month to teach parents how to keep their children from becoming the next statistic. Dennis Kauf, Action News.
So, Nick, we're going to start with you. That in that particular news article, it talks about your cousin. He's the third one they talk about that was found against the wall. I want to say this before you get started. What's so fascinating about both of those news clips that we watch is they both make it clear that Wayne Williams was convicted of 2 murders, not 28, 2. And those other murders were just assumed or closed and thrown in one lump as, okay, we got the guy that did it, and that's it. But it's very clear from those videos, even with police officials speaking, that there is no real proof that he did all or most of the ones that he wasn't convicted with, and that's where you come in. And before you go into that, this is what I would like you to do for us, Nick. Take us back in time. You're 10 years old. Your cousin, 9-year-old, is 9 years old. He's missing. He's found dead. That's got to be dramatic for a 10-year-old young man. And then this is something that you've lived with from then to now. Take us back in the time, you and Jarvis, you start first, and tell us what that experience was like and what your knowledge was of it as a child. And then let's get into why you don't believe that Wayne Williams killed your cousin and who you believe did, and why, and what's your evidence or your basis as of such. But take us back in time to that time, if you would, Nick. Go right ahead.
Well, as a 10-year-old, first I'd like to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my family experience.
Our pleasure.
And, you know, in 1980, July the 5th, it was something, it was like a gut punch for my family. A young man killed, missing. It was devastating. I'm just going to be real. It was devastating. Anthony, originally from Hogansville, Georgia, and we're a tight-knit group of people down here. Anthony probably could walk places that he probably couldn't do up there. That probably got him in trouble. And with his murder, was like, it was just something we ain't never experienced before. Cause, you know, I used to get out of school and be on the bus, and the bus would take us right by the grave. And you don't want to look over there. You know, you're nervous. You can't sleep at night. And I'm going to be real with you. It even caused wet in the bed. You know, you waking up in the middle of the night, sweat. It was just, I never seen a kid. I was only 10 years old. And this kid was part of me, part of my neighborhood. Everybody in this neighborhood like Anthony Carter down here. We called him the kid with the golden smile. And, you know, he was fast and bright. And it really hurt. It really hurt.
Jarvis, 2 of your friends was killed. What were their names?
One of them was Luby Jeter, and he was, I think, the 12th or the 13th victim on the list. And the other one was William Barrett, and he was down like about 20, 21, maybe further down the list than that.
How old were you?
I was 14 years old. I was 14 when it happened. So by that time, we were all aware of what was going on in the city. I think what really got us all more cautious was a few months earlier, into 1980. One of the girls was killed, and she was taken from her bedroom, and she was found a few months later. She had been killed. So by that time, we were all aware of what was going on, and we became very frightful. I mean, you know, the thought of somebody coming into your house and and taking you out of your bedroom and killing you kind of got everyone's interest and fear as well. So by the time of Christmas of 1980, we all talked about it constantly, including Luby in class and whatnot. So during Christmas break of 1980 and leading up into the new year is when Luby went missing. So by the time school re-entered for the new year, I think it was January the 5th of 1981, we all got the news that he was missing. And from that point on, it just became a cycle of fear and doubt. And, as a 14-year-old kid, you think you can handle yourself pretty well. And we all kind of dabbled with, martial arts taught by, someone who may have known something about it, but not enough to, get a degree, fifth degree or fourth degree black belt. But we thought we can handle ourselves up until that point. But from that point going forward, we all had nothing but fear, and no one really wanted to go anywhere. So by May of that year, William Barrett, who was another friend of mine, he didn't go to my school. He lived in his aunt was my neighbor. And he was a little older. He was 17 years old, so he was older than us. So when he was missing and found dead the following day, that's when things just kind of got off the rail, and the fear, Nicholas mentioned about, the bedwetting, and I mean, it was just a cycle of horror that we all, lived through. And I have four brothers. They're all older than I am. My oldest brother was 23 at the time, and even he was fearful of going out alone. And shortly after that, after William was killed, my mom moved us from the East Lake area of Atlanta and moved out to Belvedere, which is out in Decatur, which is only a few miles east of East Lake. And we thought we were safe there, but realizing later on that we were never really safe from what was going on, though.
One thing I want to say before we go to the next part. The next part is when we bring in Dwayne. You know, I I can relate. I unfortunately my career was born out of a murder. I had a childhood friend that was murdered, mutilated, uh, raped, and I know what y'all talking about because I know what happened in our community during that time. And it was solved. The perpetrators were brought to justice, but that was my dark night moment, for lack of a better term. And that's when I knew what I was going to do, and I knew that was going to be that I wanted to be a homicide detective, and I knew that I wanted to find the people who do the theft for which there's no restitution, and that's a human life. So I can relate to what y'all went to because I know what it's like being a person at a young age, and then you find out that someone your same age has not just been murdered, but the other things involved. So I just want to say that y'all got my sympathy or understanding in that regard, and I just want to say that. So now
Yeah.
this is when we get to the part that's interesting and where we're going to hear more from Dwayne and his expertise. I still want to go to Nick first and Jarvis, and I want you to come in and bring in your expertise. Nick, you do not believe that Wayne Williams murdered your cousin. And I believe Jarvis, you don't believe that your two friends was murdered by Wayne Williams. And of course, we know, as we saw in the news clip, those cases were closed. They just, everyone just okay. We're going to assume he did it, and that's it.
Right.
Nick, you go first. Tell me why it is that you don't believe Wayne Williams did that murder, and who you thought did it. Then we'll go to Jarvis, and then Dwayne, bring it all home to us with your research and why you believe that what these guys are saying is very valid and very true. If we could do it that way, go ahead, Nick.
Well, the first reason I believe that Wayne didn't kill my cousin was my cousin had a cousin. His name was Jimmy Edwards. Jimmy Edwards beat up my cousin the night before his murder. Not only did he beat him up, every time my cousin would see Jimmy, he would take off running, like in fear. And then I go on to the Jimmy Edwards statement saying, like, okay, The last time Anthony was seen was with him, and they was playing hide and go seek in Harris' home at 1 o'clock in the morning. So, you start buying the fact that okay, they were playing hide and go seek, but then you think about the curfew that they had imposed on the people, and then I look at it was 31 other kids there, and we can find no one to say they played hide and go seek with Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards was supposed to take a lot of tape tests with the city Atlanta police, and it never happened. He skipped town, hid. They could never find him, and it's just I just don't get it. Either he know who did it or he did it himself. And then other instances where Larry Marshall, a lot of his family members live in this area in Hogansville.
One thing before we go to Jarvis, I remember you telling us the manner of death that your cousin was killed. We know that the people that Wayne Williams killed, the manner was strangulation. How was your cousin killed?
He was stabbed two times in the front and 2 times in the back. That's what the file say. But if you read his mom's statement to Mrs. Glover, she says he was cut from mouth to mouth, throat to throat, and his shoulder was detached. It didn't match up from what the police report said. What she's seen in the mob.
All right, before we go to Jarvis, Dwayne, you got anything you want to say about that? Any knowledge you got of his cousin's murder?
Well, I mean, I could just reiterate what he said about the prime suspect, and that is definitely the cousin. And the interesting thing about it for me was that once I started reading up on the file about him, he was supposed to take a polygraph test on what would have been my 6th birthday, August the 4th in 1981. So he was supposed to take the polygraph test and he skipped town and he never showed back up. So for me, it's like if your cousin is dead, and you the teenage cousin, you got a little cousin that's dead, why would you skip town on the polygraph? And I think one of the things that's important for what Nicholas just said, that's important for people to know, is that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the reporting on what happened to some of these children. Some things were never talked about, like what he's saying about the shoulder missing and being cut, from his mouth cut. A lot of stuff wasn't reported. I don't want to go too far to the left. And let me say this so everybody knows, I got a lot of expertise on this, but man, Jarvis Miller might be the most knowledgeable person.
Correct.
When it comes down to what's in these case files. I don't think I met somebody since 2012 and I've been involved in this that got more knowledge than him. Not even Wayne's attorney.
Got it.
I agree.
With that being said,
I want to give my boy his props and his praise, because he ain't just a friend or two of the victims. Like, he done did a lot of work, and he is to be noted and respected. He knows a lot about these cases.
Understood. I'm glad you cleared that up. So without further ado, Mr. Miller, tell us about your two friends and tell us your knowledge and research and why it is that you don't believe that Wayne Williams was responsible for the 3 murders we're talking about here today.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dwayne, for your compliments. My research came out of paranoia, to be honest about it, because I was never fully convinced or satisfied with what the story that they told, not only of my friends, but the whole cases in general. So I always thought that it was something that they wasn't telling us. I must admit, after Wayne was convicted, the interest in the city kind of died down and it kind of got put on the back burner. But I've always been in some form of research. Going back to 1981, I used to collect newspaper articles, Whenever something was on the news, I would record it, with my little boom box. And then, once the internet became more prevalent, I started doing more deep diving into what was happening. And then, of course, started collecting case files. But from my perspective, I'm probably in the minority. I'm one who don't fully believe that Wayne is totally innocent, even in my two with my two friends. I just don't think the evidence that they presented in the trial was enough to convict him of a crime of this magnitude. I mean, he was convicted of 2 adults, but they sprung on the other 28 victims, well, 26, because the 2 girls, everybody will agree that those were not part of the crimes. So 26 victims were still attached to him in some kind of way. But they never show enough proof that that's what happened, outside of fiber evidence, witness testimonies, which was, people came forth with information saying they saw him with certain victims, but it was after the fact. It was after the fact that there was a $500,000 reward for someone who can bring in, at least lead to the apprehension and conviction of the killer. So everyone had a motive to name Wayne Williams as being the killer because of the chance of collecting that money, including myself and my brother. We even said that we saw Wayne Williams at William Barrett's house, with his aunt's house, who lived next door to us, which wasn't true. I mean, and we were kids back then, so we were trying to cash in also. But as I got older, I realized the damage that can do to someone, especially if you don't have proof, is that what happened. So moving forward, so I started my research really in 2004, started gathering files from the FBI, and they opened up their archives on these cases, and they had the files heavily redacted, so you couldn't get a lot out of it. But it was enough to glean of what really took place. And nothing pointed to Wayne Williams as the perpetrator for most of these cases, if any of them. It does kind of lean to him being involved in some kind of way. And I think that's where I'm on the fence now, that the possibility of him being involved with my 2 friends, as well as others, is there. But I don't think there's enough proof that he was the actual killer, though. In fact, there were other suspects they had also who had a better MO of being the possible killer than Wayne Williams was.
So let me bring this up. So there was 2 very interesting men I got to meet. One is deceased and one is serving a life sentence for murder. And I met both of them when I used to be a driver for the former police chief of Atlanta, Eldrin Bell. So, and those 2 men I met, one name was Lewis Graham, and of course, he was once the police chief of Fulton County. He's deceased now, God bless the dead. And then the other person that I met during that time I was Bell's driver was Sidney Dorsey, who was involved with the murder of Derwin Brown, and another interesting case we'll discuss one day. But of course, he later confessed to giving the orders to that murder. But interestingly, during that time when I was Chief Bell's driver, he was friends with both of them. And at that time, I was in homicide. So we would discuss the fact that I was in homicide because both of them were former homicide detectives with APD, both Graham and Dorsey. Both of them were very, very adamant about the fact that Wayne Williams was not the killer. And I think they tried to say in none of them, which I don't agree with that, just like you. I'm on that side. I'm not saying he didn't do any of them. I'm just not sure he did all of them. But and something else interesting came out of that. I know that Graham at one point put together a task force to look into it. And I think that his objective, based on friends I had that were involved with that, was to see if he could clear Wayne. But these investigators actually found some evidence that linked him to maybe 2 or 3 of the other cases, not all, but 2 or 3 of the other cases. So when you put in all the conjecture of media, conspiracy, and everything else, it almost reminds you of what happened with the Kennedy assassination. By the time all of this came together, no one knew what was going on. I think it wasn't until recent ballistics that people realized it was an accidental shooting from a Secret Service agent. And that's another story and another show for another time. But I say all of that to say this. We got 28 murders. And there's a difference in what we refer to in homicide as a modus operandi, or the method of the crime. And I'm not saying that a person is not capable of killing different people different ways, but usually when we deal with these type of crimes, during my experience, it was signatures. There are people who tend to use guns, some tend to use knives, some tend to use their hands or whatever. And what's interesting, I want you and the both of you to speak to this. We got one of the kids were killed with a knife, or two. Somebody was shot, is my understanding. And then, of course, we know the two that's attributed to him with fiber evidence is strangulation. So there's a lot of different methods of killing here. What's Jarvis and Dwayne? Whoever wants to go first is fine. What's your thoughts on the fact of that the fact that you've got these multiple homicides, but the method of killing the victims is not the same? If y'all would expound on what y'all expertise and y'all research came up on that.
Okay, I'll go first. There were, we mentioned about the strangulation and suffocation of certain victims. And then we had, that was actually, I think, 2 or 3 victims who were stabbed. Anthony Carter was stabbed, and that was definitely his manner of death. But also William Barrett was stabbed also, but it was post-mortem. He had been strangled first. This is what he died from. And then someone stabbed him twice in his stomach, I guess to make sure he was dead. And I think there was another victim, John Porter, who was John Porter was 28 years old. And he was also stabbed. He was added to the list pretty much during the trial. You know, they found some blood in Wayne Williams' car. And, you know, it didn't match any of the other victims, but it matched John Porter. So that's how John Porter got on the list, was because his quote unquote blood enzymes matched the same blood that was in Wayne Williams's car. But there were multiple ways of these victims died. And I do think the ones that were strangled and suffocated may have been the same killer or killers. But the ones who were stabbed, and especially in Anthony Carter's case, that seemed more personal, to be stabbing a child, you know, 7 times or 4 or 5 times. And, you know, and especially the type of stab wounds that he died from, that was more of a personal killing to me, which means someone that he knew may have been responsible for his death. Dwayne, you want to expound on this also?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that Nicholas brought up Larry Marshall a minute ago, because Larry Marshall was the person who basically he went to Maynard Jackson and said, if you want to know what's going on with these kids, I could let you know. And Maynard Jackson kicked him out of his office. But Larry Marshall was also the person that was wanted for something unrelated, and was found working under assumed identity in Connecticut. But he gave a statement to Wayne Williams' attorney at the time, Lynn Wiley, about the strangulation cases, and told him that he knew the silk handkerchiefs that was being used to strangle the kids and where they were in a particular house in Atlanta. You know, so that's one of the things that always was very polarizing to me, that nothing was ever done, especially if somebody goes to the mayor and says, hey man, I know what's going on with these kids. And he is definitely front and center with a lot of what we know in the investigative work and in the Brady files. That's another thing that isn't talked about when we discuss the Atlanta child murders, just how many Brady violations it was, right? So the case that Jarvis mentioned earlier with the young girl that was taken out her window, I think 6 years old, Latanya
Yes.
Wilson. Nathaniel Cater, who ends up being one of the murders that Wayne Williams is charged with, his fingerprint is found in her windowsill, and she's supposedly taken through her window. I'm not too certain that she was taken, through the window, but he was working as a maintenance man as an odd job for the actual apartment complex that they lived in, and he replaced her window. you know so it's all of these it's not just the fact that one of them was shot and multiple was stabbed. It's just all of these facts that just lead you in so many different directions. And that was very profound what you said a minute ago, as far as all of the things that have been introduced that create so much confusion. There's a lot of things that have been said in the cases that are just not true at all. you know so when you get to talking about the different murders and how they was murdered, and the fact that there were people like Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne who were adults, one person wasn't gonna do that to them. you
Yeah.
know um Especially knowing, when you get to know some of the cases and the backgrounds of these individuals. These was dudes that was known in the streets to be characters that you don't mess around with. So for some of the murders that take place the way that they took place, it ain't no way that one person did it, and it damn sure went with.
Okay, so with that being said, Nick, I can't see you, my man, but you there, right? Okay. We got problems getting Nick, but one thing I want to get on that I'm sure y'all know about is this DNA. In Nick's cousin's case, there was supposed to be some touch DNA evidence that was supposed to be submitted, and it was supposed to be submitted during a particular time. I think it might have been during the Paul Howard, Fonnie Willis transition or something like that. And what Nick was telling me is that no one has gotten back to them to say what that DNA evidence showed or didn't show. And that's just out there. And I think he also said that he got in touch with the company, but the company said they can't release that information. It has to be given to his family through the DA's office, and that no one from the DA's office has contacted him and given him information about the DNA, which I would think his family deserves to know about. What's y'all knowledge on that, since we lost Nick, and what can y'all tell me about that? And then after we talk about that, well, not after, I guess we get ready to talk about the politics that go behind murder cases and priorities and stuff like that. But go ahead and give us some insight onto that.
I think as far as the DNA goes, I think part of the reason why they never have devolved who the person who the person or persons were based off of their analysis of the touch DNA. Their main goal was to say that it belonged to Wayne Williams, and so for them not to be willing to devolve who the results or the findings of the DNA analysis kind of give me the impression that it wasn't Wayne Williams that was in the DNA testing that they examined. A little back history of what we, Dwayne, myself, most people who have been really researching these cases have found is that in Atlanta during that time, there were at least 4 or 5 active child sex rings going on. And almost every victim, well, victims in Anthony Carter's age, I can't really put them in there. I think they may have been introduced by someone older, like, for instance, Anthony's cousin. But most of the adolescent and teen and then young adult victims were all in some way connected to pedophilia. Even unfortunately, the two victims that I knew, Louis Jeter and William Barrett, didn't know at the time, but as I researched their cases, they were Louis, for instance, was involved in at least three known pedophiles in Atlanta. One of them was a white gentleman, or a white man, I want to call him a gentleman, but a white male who lived in the Lakewood area. Name was John David Wilcoxon. And Wilcoxon had two other cohorts, Lionel St. Louis and Francis Hardy, all three white men. And they had been running a child prostitution, child sex, child pornography ring in 1981. They said it had been operating for like 17 years. And it was mainly, based on what they were saying, it was mainly white kids who were involved in this child sex ring and child prostitution, child pornography ring. But some of the white boys actually mentioned they saw Louis Jeter at this man's house several times, along with another victim named Earl Terrell, who was also killed during these crimes. He was also connected to this Wilcoxon guy. And also, there was a MARTA bus driver who was known to have been involved in child pornography and pedophilia. Louis Jeter and William Barrett were both connected to him. Victims say they saw both of them at his apartment on several occasions. And this bus driver was known for giving kids free rides, well, boys free rides on the MARTA bus, in exchange for sexual favors, though. So they never told us, and they never would tell anyone, that I think these cases were connected to children and child sex rings that were very active in Atlanta at that time. I think within that mix of pedophiles are the possible suspects of, if not all these kids, some of them at least.
Got it. Nick, I'm glad you're back. What we're talking about is a DNA that your family hasn't gotten an answer on yet, and they kind of went into it for you. But before we go further, someone brought up a point, and I think I want Dwayne to handle this first because I think he's perfect for this. But somebody brought up, Jerome, you brought up a comment where someone talked about the city calmed down. And can you bring that up again? So, yeah. Read that, Dwayne, and briefly tell me what you think about what LJ is saying here, too.
Yeah, so truthfully, the city didn't calm down, and there were still murders that was going on that just wasn't being talked about in the news media. And truthfully, to take it a step back, when and I, Jarvis, he be hitting the nail on the head with a lot of stuff, but there was so many other murders that was going on while what we called the Atlanta child murders was taking place. There were other murders that were going on that fit the same mold of what was taking place, but they weren't included. So in particular, two murders that always stood out to me was the murder of a young lady named Angela Bacon and another young lady named Cynthia Montgomery. And both of these young women were connected to sex trafficking, with, the lack of saying it any other way than I possibly can. And to answer LJ's question, absolutely, there was a lot of covering up being done. And in part, what I would say is that what I've learned over time, I've lost a lot of respect for the establishment in Atlanta. All of those names, they got streets named after them and all of that type of stuff in the city. I really don't got no respect for them. At the same time, I think that it was a very tough and trying time, because this was kind of like the changing of the baton in the old South. So a lot of the decisions that Maynard Jackson may have made, he was making those decisions under a lot of pressure based on the fact that it was almost a blatant attack on his political administration. When you really look at what was happening behind the scenes, Jarvis could tell you it's probably a lot of these murders that would have been solved and could have been solved, but white police officers wasn't going to give you the information that would help you solve a case if you was in Atlanta and they had this information about somebody in Decatur or DeKalb County. They wouldn't give it to you if they didn't want Victor Hill, the black cop, you understand, to be the person to solve the case. So it was a lot of stuff like that going on. And he is right in what he just said in the second part of his statement, is that the city officials and everybody stopped talking about it, but it was still a whole bunch going on. And from my estimation and from how I view it, the sex rings never stopped and never went away. They just became more sophisticated in Atlanta.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Let me rant and rave a little bit. Well, not rave. Let me rant. There's a lot of truth to what LJ and what you guys are talking about. We're dealing with situations like that in Clayton County. You know, when you got situations where you got officials that are responsible for the safety of people, but they investigate some and don't investigate others, or like we got a situation in Clayton County where the DA is linked to covering up the molestation of children, and more children got molested because she wouldn't act. And a former chairman. Anytime you have officials that do stuff like that, a lot of crimes go unsolved and a lot of things are pushed under the rug and more people get victimized. So seeing that happen in my county in real time, there's no doubt in my mind that a lot of that could have been there. The one thing that I think that disappointed me most when I went to homicide, you know, imagine that's a job I always wanted, uh, something I was inspired to do. It what happened, and what I was amazed of when I got to homicide is how there were some cases that just were pushed on the shelf, and if no one raised hell about it or no one had the power to call someone and say, can you do something, nothing gets done. But then I've seen cases where people weren't killed, and all of us got called in because someone knew the chairman or the mayor, and they're like, hey, we need to call everyone in to look into this. But yet we would have just dealt with a murder 2 3 days ago and worked on it for one day, and nothing else was ever worked on it again. You know, I've always been under the impression that you know, when there's a murder, everything needs to stop. All resources need to go on that. um what Nick told me about the DA's office not getting back to him with what the DNA would have shown in that case, that kind of stuff bothers me, especially when we see the politics that's going on. You know, in Fulton County, which is the DA's office that he's dealing with, a whole year was spent trying to make Young Thug look like he was the Al Capone of the county. Uh, who knows how much time was spent trying to go after the president for an election? Right. But
Right.
yet we can't get back with his family to give them an answer about the DNA and the killing of his child, of his cousin. And, you know, I want to say, not just to that DA, but to all the DAs like her that take that office and spend more time using it for political reasons or using it to get on TV. This, if you really want to be great, if you really want to be famous, just do your job. If you go after the murderers, if you were able to solve who killed some of these kids, that might have got you the fame and recognition you wanted instead of just screwing around with celebrities and politicians.
Gotcha.
All his family is asking for is answers to their DNA. That's all they're asking for. And you know, it makes me think about other things that upset me as well too. Kind of like the lady in Piedmont Park and her dog that was stabbed. What happened to that murder?
That's true.
If all of the time and effort spent going after the president and after Young Thug, maybe we'd know who did that. Because whoever that fool is, he's still out there,
That's true. Yeah.
and he needs to be caught. And and I used to fire and suspend a lot of people, and I don't regret it. And everyone I said that was fired should have been fired. And a lot of it had to do with cases like this. I can remember responding to a murder one night and dispatching my fugitive team there, and the sergeant shows up and the lieutenant does it. And I asked, "Where's the lieutenant at?" And his answer was, "Well, he's home with his wife. He wanted me to come check." Well, good. He's the sergeant. You're the lieutenant now. If you can respond and I can respond, why is he not here? I had another lieutenant I had to discipline. We're looking for a murderer. And then when he advised me Friday where they were at, I said, "What you gonna do next?" "Well, Monday. What the hell you mean Monday? You gonna give a murderer the weekend off?"
Wow.
Right.
That's sad.
I had other folks I had to get rid of. They're at a cookout. We get a 5-year-old killed. Hey, I'm calling everybody in. Everything stops. We got to deal with this. But we're at a cookout. We've been drinking. We can't respond. Really? And you're at a cookout in a county car? Until we get rid of these folks that believe that DA's offices are to be used for political gain, that believe they're supposed to be off on nights and weekends and holidays when families are losing their loved ones, these are the type of unanswered questions we will continue to get. That's piss poor police work.
It is.
And that's a misuse of resources. And if you believe you're supposed to work bankers hours when you're supposed to be looking for killers, you don't need to wear a badge.
Wow.
So anyway, let me get off my soapbox. Nick and Jerome, you probably got some stuff you want to bring out. I think I didn't took up too much time, and Nick, I know you got some stuff you want to say as well
Can I
too.
can I
Go
say
ahead.
something real quick?
Yeah.
So in 1994, this is important to the case and what you're saying about the district attorney's office and that clown Paul Howard. And this is according to Lynn Watley, who used to be Wayne Williams' attorney. He didn't find out about the Department of Justice inquiry into the FBI crime labs until about 2014, right? But the initial investigation started in 1994. And from what I understand, Fulton County was notified in 1999, which would have been a grand slam for Wayne Williams because in 1999, that's when he had his habeas corpus trial in Butts County, and all of the information came out about the suppression of the GBI 8100 files investigation into the KKK, and one of the informants, GBI informants, a man named Billy Joe Whitaker, actually testified in that trial, that habeas corpus trial, about the white supremacist involvement into the cases. But if Lynn Watley and the rest of the team at that time, he had Bobby Lee Cook, what's the cat Jarvis, who is it Dershowitz?
Dershowitz,
No,
yeah.
Kunstler. No, Kunstler.
Constable,
It was Kunstler,
Kubi,
Bobby Lee Cook, and what's the other one's name? Ron Kubi, the
Kubi,
cat
yeah.
with the ponytail. Like I'm talking about the all-star of all all-star defense attorneys, and they didn't know about this inquiry into the FBI crime lab. And when you talk about the basis of the evidence that was presented against Wayne Williams, it was the fiber evidence.
Nick, you were gone. You back. Tell us about this DNA evidence that your family has yet to get an answer on, and what you would tell me the resolution you would like. Well, of course, we know the resolution is you would like to know who killed your cousin, and you would like that person found and tried if they're still alive. Of course, we know that. But tell me about the resolution you never got from the Fulton County DA's office as far as the DNA connected to your cousin's case.
Well, back August 19th, 2021, Paul Howard had a meeting. He invited all the families to the courthouse downtown. And he sat down and talked with us. And the purpose for bringing us there is were going to send all the DNA evidence to Utah, and they promised us it would take no more than 2 years to get back the evidence. Now we're going on like 4 or 5 years. And the reason I think the DNA is important for me is it would definitely show that Wayne didn't kill my cousin because the DNA is important. It's important. It's just very important. I just don't believe it's heartbreaking that we had to wait this long to get this. It's like if you promised me 2 years, at least contact me. Since Paul Howard got out of office, ain't nobody contacted us. It's like we on the bottom of the pole. And
Yeah, well, you got
that
to get
DNA
past the
evidence.
celebrity and politicians that DA is trying to get famous off of that didn't quite work out, and then maybe they can get to actually looking for murderers. But go ahead.
I personally think that DNA evidence will help a lot of mothers that still living get an ending to this. And the longer you wait, we lose them one by one every year, you know. And that's heartbreaking to see these mothers to go to the grave not knowing who killed their kids when you got the evidence, but you just won't release it.
Exactly, Jerome. You've been mighty silent, young man.
When I think about this whole thing, and all of you made great statements about what was going on. You know, I think about how these murders changed law enforcement and changed the Black community in Atlanta. It started with one child being missing, then a murder, then another, and then another. If you remember back then, and I think the video alluded to it, they were calling them runaways. But the mothers knew what the deal was, the parents knew, and the communities knew. And we know this type of stuff because anybody in the Black community, and particularly neighbors, they tracked their children like heartbeat patterns back then. And that was
Right.
because where were they at? In the deep South. And so, what was hard to take away when we take a look at this and we break it all apart is how city leaders at the time, they was trying to say there's no pattern here. And that's what they kept on saying. So the reporters barely covered it, but until something else happened. And this was the word fear. And this was the first time this city, or at least the second time now that they're dealing with an iteration of fear. The first time was when we had to go ahead and deal with um, school integration. Now we
Right.
got this situation popping up. So when we take a look at this, and kids were staying inside, just like you were talking about, Nick, Jarvis, and so on and so forth. The Black community did what the government refused to do. They started policing their own in those
Yeah.
neighborhoods. And this is where we absolutely see the abandonment by government disguised as bureaucracy. And this is where we are in at time and time again. So this is when you started seeing white children in health in wealthy suburbs. You would see the breaking news alerts, the federal task force, the national emergency coordination, even presidential addresses. We've had
Mhm.
that back in the 80s too, when this stuff was going on. So this all shifted where now we're looking at what the legacy is. And this is where the advent of the FBI profiling unit became prominent. And so, even though with the heartbreak of many children passing away, um, no matter who it is, law enforcement had to change itself in many ways to go ahead and address what this case brought on. And it was a slap in the face to every American city to say, hey, guess what? Do you want to be like Atlanta?
Hmm.
Probably not. You need to change this. We still struggle with that legacy today.
It's funny that you mentioned that too, because I think that was one of the main reasons why once Williams arrested, tried, and convicted, how everything just died down and calmed down. Politicians, for the most part, because it was about money too. I mean, and
Right.
Atlanta is a very well tourist site as far as businesses go,
Yeah.
convention centers and whatnot. It was
Busiest
costing
airport in the world.
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So it was costing Atlanta money. Uh, these killings were costing Atlanta money as far as no one wanted to come here because of this fear of, a serial killer is on the streets. And it made Atlanta look bad also because we got,
Hmm.
Atlanta's first black mayor. We got an entire cabinet, of black officials, even with Elgin Bell being one of the first at his level. And we had, Lee Brown and all these guys. It was their first time being at that level in their careers, and Atlanta's first time having blacks in at that level of politics. So it made Atlanta look bad by having these killings going on under a black person's, a black administration's watch. So once they got Wayne Williams as their suspect, and once he was convicted, it died down so quickly. Even from my perspective, I thought we were safe. I honestly thought we were safe after Wayne Williams was arrested. Things kind of went back to normal for a little bit. I mean, prior to these killings happening, it was not strange for me and my brothers and friends. And I live in East Lake, out not far from East Lake Meadows, down the street from the Meadows. That's a rough neighborhood. We would ride the bus from there downtown to go to the bookstore or go to the movies, to the Omni. And we really had no fear of getting hurt by an adult. You may have your rivals with other guys that you fought with, but you never felt like you were going to get killed on your way there or back home. After this started happening, no one wanted to go downtown by themselves. We went with my parents everywhere with my mom, but my father had already passed by this time. We went, my mom going to the store, we're going with you. We didn't go separately. We didn't go with anyone else but her. But after Wayne Williams was convicted, we kind of eased back a little bit and thought that we were safe. But looking back now, we were never safe. In fact, we were probably in more harm after Wayne was convicted because it gave us a false sense of security that we were okay, but we were not though.
I'm
And
glad
I
that you brought that up
Yeah.
because that in part was when the multi agencies started coming together for task force. This was born out of that. But where
Mhm,
do we fail again? 9/11.
Yeah.
that's
We
true.
failed again, where all the federal agencies, they had pieces of what was about to happen in 9/11. And then guess what? Nobody wanted to share because everybody was just trying to go ahead and keep things close to the chest. Same
That's true.
difference here. None of
Yeah.
these multi agencies were working with each other, Atlanta PD, FBI, so on and so forth. And so I'm glad that you brought that point up because that was very self evident in this situation.
But
Yeah.
even
No, go ahead.
Also,
I was going to say, even
Okay.
even in that case, with the task force, they had all the local county authorities, the Cab, Fulton, Clayton, Rockdale, Cobb, all these counties were involved along with the city of Atlanta, East Point, along with GBI and the FBI. But like the Cab County, for instance, the Cab County had issues because they were not getting information that was being cycled through the whole task force. It's like they were holding it to themselves on some sides, and the same thing with Fulton County. And they finally backed out of the task force to a certain extent and started investigating the cases themselves that were in their particular counties.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that was part of the problem too. Atlanta was like, it seemed like there was something they was trying to hide beyond the murders, and I always thought it was this sex thing that was going on though.
Believe it or not, I've seen a lot of this. A lot of times when these high profile cases come and you have task force, there's an actual fight between law enforcement, who's going to catch the guy, who's going to get the credit. And they get too interested in doing that. So they don't share information. They stumble over each other. I've seen that happen a whole lot of times. I've seen we had it happen in Clayton County where they were worried who was going to, can we get the press conference out first, or who's going to get the credit for the serial killer, not serial killer, but serial rapist. And it's unfortunate that people who wear badges, prosecutors, people who wear robes, um, are more interested on how can I be the one to get the credit for it than making sure the person gets caught. At the end of the day, when these people get caught, nobody really says it was the cab, it was Clayton, it was the sheriff, it was the police. They just say they caught them, meaning law enforcement did. But unfortunately, the ego's involved. There are people that would rather hold the information or mess up the case because they're afraid that you might solve it and someone might think you're the hero. And it's sad, but that continues to happen to this day, and that has botched so many investigations. And there's no doubt in my mind that type of stuff was going around during the Atlanta child murders.
I agree. Well, even
And
in current times, I mean, to cut off Dwayne, but we had
that's
the
all right.
Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta back in '96, and the FBI, they was adamant that Richard Jewell was the killer, the bomber,
Mhm.
and the guy, it ruined a man's life. I mean, the guy ended up dying years later from the stress that they imposed upon him. But it was the ATF that found out that the bomb didn't match other bombings that were being done in that same time period. But the FBI never apologized. They just backed off, and say, okay, maybe he wasn't the killer or the bomber. And he did sue, the local news outlets who were saying he was the actual Olympic Park bomber. But in actuality, he had nothing to do with it at all.
Mm.
Right. And
Right.
that's another classic example of how the media can botch investigations as well, and how they can get involved in things and make a suspect. And then sometimes when they do that, law enforcement will key in on that person because there's a strange relationship between prosecutors and the press. And, they actually work in concert sometimes to get convictions or to go in on somebody like that. And then they get locked in on somebody and it's not even the right suspect. And
Right.
that's very, very sad. Let me tell you this, fellas. We're up on an hour. Let me say this in conclusion. First of all, I really admire you three guys. First of all, um, I'm very impressed with the fact that Dwayne Hendricks, who he doesn't have a relative or a friend that was killed, but this case touched him to the point to where he said, "Okay, I'm gonna get involved and I'm gonna try and look into this and do something." Keep that up, my man, because I think we all know that I can't remember the quote verbatim, but bad things happen when good people do nothing. And so it's
Right.
always good to see a stand-up guy like you. Jarvis, very much your knowledge of it, the fact that you lived it and did all the research, which had to be more emotional for you than Dwayne because you actually know two of the victims. I know, unfortunately, Nick is having some technical difficulties, but I do want to applaud him for trying to seek justice for his cousin after all of these years. And
Absolutely.
it was Nick that reached out to us and put us all together so that this show could come together. I always let Jerome close out, but I just want to say this in conclusion. And I hope that people who have the authority or whatever to look into this case or listening or somebody tells them about it. I just want to say this to them, and I want to say this to a lot of elected officials, especially in the metro area and especially in our community. Do your job. Quit all the dancing and clowning. Find some murderers. Clean up our communities. Quit colluding with criminals. If you really want to impress people, don't get on TV and dance. Solve some crimes. And if the 6 o'clock news is what you really want, that's the way to get on the 6 o'clock news. Figure out who killed Nick's cousin. Stay out of all of this foolishness, elections and putting charges on people just because you can. Figure out who killed that woman in Piedmont Park,
Hmm.
stabbed that dog, and stabbed her. Get these lunatics off the street and make our community safe. That's the right way to get the attention you so crave. Please don't waste no more of our time with this political prosecutions and looking for Al Capone that don't exist. There are a lot of hurting mothers and families out here. They just want you to do your job and find these folks and put them in jail. Jerome?
I just want to close out today's show thanking our guests and in memory of all the young in life that we lost during that time. I do not want to go ahead and leave this show with that. I mean, we lost a lot of young boys, teenagers, and young adults. This was a horrific time. And if you remember those times, it was just as scary for everyone in Atlanta as well in the rest of the country, because it did drive fear all over. It was an innocence that was gone. You know, you remember what it was beforehand, and then afterwards, it was a loss of innocence. With that being said, for many of you, as soon as we leave the show, please feel free to go ahead and subscribe, like, comment what you like about the case, and share it. And these are moments that we want people to understand that these conditions do exist. You know, for Nick's family, they're still looking for justice. And we, on this show, that is our platform, whether it be social justice or anything else. So we advocate for those, and for and certainly for the memories of each and every one of them that we lost. So without that being said and everything like that, thank you. Great show, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on in and talking about this. Let's do this again.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, guys.
It's
Thanks
so
for.
much.
It was a
It's
pleasure
so
to
much
have
we
y'all.
didn't get the chance to talk about.
Yeah,
We'll
we'll
have you
come back
back.
to that.
It's so much.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Yeah,
Take care, guys.
You too. Thank you.
absolutely.